Hello and welcome once again to this week's Hocus Focus. I'm Sara Mondaini.
And I'm Thomas Sheridan.
And thank you for joining us for episode 20. Yes, 20. It only seems like yesterday when we started this. And we've come such a long way getting into our stride with the show. And it's just naturally evolved into something that we're both really proud of. And tonight, as always, we'll be delving into the weird and unexplained stories from around the world and take you on a journey through high strangeness and hauntology. But before we get started this week, I just want to say hi, Thomas, and how's life been treating you since last week's episode?
Very interesting. I've been doing a lot of stuff. I've been very busy in the kind of world that we work in. And the weather's been sunny. It's been on and off, cold and dry. And I will have an interesting and slightly different psychic weather this week. So stay on board for that one, folks.
Great stuff. Yeah, the week here has been not so bad. Just been busy preparing for this week's show, really, and a few other bits and pieces I've got in the pipeline. Enjoying the cold but sunny weather, but it's all good. And I feel like the weather, the psychic weather's lifted a little bit now, so we're coming over the other side of it.
Definitely feels that. Definitely feels with the cold, dry weather. I mean, it makes me really believe this stuff is coming from the sun or something. But there was a sense of refreshing energy, whatever.
Yeah, I think the sun makes a big difference as well because we've had a never-ending winter. So let's dive into our first topic of the evening, which is the paranormal black dogs of England. The paranormal black dogs of England, or the Barghest as it's also known, is a legendary creature in English folklore, particularly in the northern counties such as Yorkshire and Lancashire. And it's often described as a black, shaggy dog with large teeth and glowing eyes, which is said to roam the countryside at night. Now, according to legend, the Barghest is an omen of death, and its appearance is said to foretell the imminent demise of those who see it. Some tales suggest it's a shape-shifting creature able to transform into other forms, such as a headless man, a giant, a cat, or even a rabbit. Now, the word ghost in northern England used to be pronounced guest, and the name Barghest is believed to be a combination of both, meaning town and guest, so the town ghost. And it's also possible it could have derived from the German Berggeist, which also means mountain ghost. There are various regional variations of these phantom black dogs with different names and characteristics attributed to the creature. In Yorkshire, for example, it's often called the Padfoot, while in Lancashire, it's known as the Trash or the Skriker because of its shrieking cries. Now, despite its fearsome reputation, the Barghest or the phantom dog is also said to be a guardian of the countryside, protecting it from harm and helping lost travellers find their way home. Some tales even suggest that the Barghest can bring good luck to those who treat it with respect. Black dogs seem to haunt the old lanes and crossroads, the old churchyards, and basically ancient sites, places that are steeped with local folklore and beliefs. And many of these places are considered liminal spaces where the boundary between the living world and the afterlife is blurred. The black dog's haunting presence in these locations has led many people to believe there may be a connection to ley lines. Perhaps the black dog represents some form of energy or natural force shaped into its archetypal form by human mind, with certain conditions affecting the human psyche, leading to strange experiences and encounters with this unexplainable phantom. Ancient places were recognised as sites of great power and significance by our ancestors, and perhaps the black dog, as a powerful archetype, appears at these places of ancient sanctity as a manifestation of the energy and the mystery that surrounds them. The phantom black dog has been around forever and captured the imagination of many, and it's inspired lots of stories, from the famous Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle to the Harry Potter series of books by J.K. Rowling. There's a Barghest said to be down the road from where I live, the Barghest of Godley Green, And the legend there goes that some people died in mysterious circumstances in one of the farmhouses, and ever since a spirit in the form of a great big yellow hound has haunted the neighbourhood. And it's said to be as big as a cow, wandering around at night on the grounds where the old demolished farmhouse used to be. And reports as far back as the early 1900s say many had come face to face with the hound. And each who came face to face has a similar description of its hanging tongue, protruding eyes, and deep melancholic howling, also known in the area as skriking. Children returning home from school had seen the hound dash past them, and they've returned home scared out of their wits. And young lovers walking hand in hand down the quiet lanes, looking for a secluded spot, have had their romantic plans scuppered by the spectral hound. And back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the wife of one of the farmers was on her way home from delivering milk to the neighbouring town of Hyde. And she was driving along the lane past the demolished farmstead where the horse suddenly stood still and began to tremble. And the form of a giant hound, yellow in colour, with intense, staring eyes, sprang out from nowhere, and she watched as it jumped over the fence and ran towards a water well. Another lady saw the hound when she was a child, and she was out walking with a friend. And she said the hound kept pace with them, and the girl looked for stones to throw at it, but her friend warned her, "No, you mustn't, or it'll attack and tear you to pieces." And a third lady, also in the early 1900s, saw the ghost hound somewhere between 1890 and 1900, and she went to the water well to get some water one cold winter's night. And when she reached the well, she came face to face with the creature, and she said it looked as big as a lion, with eyes as large as saucers, as it came towards her, and she backed away. She was too terrified to turn her back on it and run, so she just kept her face to it as she retreated, and when she got nearer home, it actually vanished into thin air. A fishmonger from Hyde once saw the hound as he made his weekly journey delivering fish, and he too said it was as big as a lion and tan-coloured, and it started to walk beside him, and if he stopped, it stopped, and if he ran, it also ran, and he couldn't get away from it. The man stopped, and the hound was between him and a hedge, and he reached out and struck it with his hand, and his hand went straight through it, and he hit nothing, and it ran off in front of him, and the man also ran in the opposite direction. And it was a long time before he'd venture down the lane again late at night, and he said it was the most hideous thing he'd ever seen, and he never wanted to see that thing again, even if he lived to be 100 years old. And so on are the different people who've seen the terrible spectre of the yellow hound of Godley Green. The legend is that the ghost hound haunts the lanes and fields of the old farmstead until the crime for which it's accursed has been atoned for, and then its midnight wanderings will cease and the troubled spirit will find rest. From names such as the Black Shuck, Padfoot, and Bogey Beast, the phantom black dog is said to have roamed these lands for thousands of years. So what do you make of that, Thomas?
I didn't want you to stop telling those stories. I felt like I was around a campfire or something. They were great. Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems to be Scandinavian in origin. The part of England where the story is the most seems to be from York all the way down to the Ribble in Lancashire. And so that was the heartland of the Danelaws, where the Danish Vikings controlled, well, nearly all of northern England. And so, and there are similar stories in Sweden, in Denmark, and in Norway about the hound, the Bagest kind of thing. And I think the Germanic or Nordic etymology is probably the correct. So it probably came when those people moved to England during the Danelaws in the early Middle Ages. They probably brought this archetype with them, which this is a fascinating thing I always am amazed by, is how a tribe of people, when they move to a new world or a new country, bring their ghosts with them. Like I was telling you there a while back about the Banshee appearing among Irish immigrants in the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia, and also the Germanic witchcraft making its way to Western Pennsylvania. So here I have another case again of a kind of a folk spirit creature, and a quite frightening one, making its way to the moors of England. I always think of, and I know it's a werewolf, but I always think of the opening scene of the film, An American Werewolf in London, when the two American lads are hiking through the moors in the fog, and the thing is stalking them. Of course, you get that in the Sherlock Holmes Hound of the Baskervilles thing. Yeah, I mean, there's something. And then you go back and forth like everything else with this kind of stuff. Then you go, is it a folk spirit of a certain kind of people? You know, like all the places in England that end with the letter BY were all founded by the Danish, like Corby and Derby and that kind of thing. And then you think to yourself, there is enough wilderness up there for wild animals to live if they're smart enough and hiding enough. And what makes the black dog paranormal entity of England so interesting in one sense is the Black Shuck, which is more a little bit south of that's what it's called, a little bit south of where you are, heading closer to the Midlands, Staffordshire, that kind of area. The in one of the folklore stories, a Black Shuck was killed and buried in a graveyard. And about 5 or 6 years ago, they dug up a grave in somewhere in this part of England where the Black Shuck was, and found the skeleton of a colossal dog. So, you know, well, here we are again. Is it a spirit, or is it a cryptid? The old adage that we seem to be confronted with every time we do something like this on Hocus Pocus.
I believe it's a spirit, not a cryptid. Possibly a guardian spirit, maybe, would be seen as a guardian spirit of the land. Because dogs, like in many cultures, dogs are revered for the protective qualities. And the bar, I guess, might be a representation of that, and watching over ancient sites and ley lines and other places, keeping them safe from those that would desecrate them, especially with all the building and renovations that are going on the greenlands and the green belts of the country. So it could be that.
Yeah, and that's why these stories show up in these new towns that were built on the outskirts of cities. They were all built on, I don't know what you say the word sacred lands, but haunted lands, you know?
Yeah, or maybe sacred to our ancestors that lived here, you know, what before the development took place, when it back in the days when it wasn't modern, it was all horse drawn, or just people going about their business peacefully. Villagers, if you like, pagans, villagers. Could it be a spirit that guides souls to the afterlife? And is that why sometimes it's often seen near graveyards and other places associated with death? And also it's the legend is that it's said to appear before a death as well. So is it a form of a four-legged banshee, an English version of a banshee?
Well, one of the names they call it is a hellhound. And in the Pendle story, when Alison devises hex John Law on the road between Halifax and Pendle, he collapsed and he saw a gigantic dog looking over him, a gigantic black dog. And later on, one of the people on trial stated that they had a familiar who was a gigantic black dog, the hellhound kind of thing. So it seems to have a connection with magic as well, that you can summon it. So there you go, the spirit thing there as well. That in folk magic, some witches in that part of England were capable of summoning a hellhound as a kind of an otherworld familiar.
Yes, and could it be superstition that's given it the reputation of a hellhound? Because it's not harmed anybody yet. Again, with these things, they've never harmed anybody. There's never been any reports of anybody being harmed. They've just seen it and been afraid of it.
Yes, but there is because it's not Christian, they say it's a hell demon thing, you know, the usual bullshit. and it goes right back to, I think it's called a Cerberus, the hound that guards Hades in Greek mythology. So it has a very long lineage in history. This concept of a supernatural, otherworldly hound that acts as a kind of a mediator between this world and the afterlife. When you said you wanted to do this story, I kind of racked my head to see if there was any similar comparative stories in Ireland, and there isn't. A similar, not that I found anyway. In Ireland, the Irish word for hound is cu, cu, and the Irish word for dog is modra. Now that's the distinction between a dog that you have as a pet or a companion as a modra, and a wild dog is a cu. And you have the famous Irish mythological character called Cuchulainn, and how he got that name was he slew the Hound of Ulster, which was a giant wild hound that served a character called Cullen, and that's why he changed his name from Setanta to Cuchulainn. I saw a stupid meme there years ago saying that a Cuchulainn is a person in Ireland who loves dogs. No, it's a guy who killed the dog, but a wild hound. That's how he got his name. So that's kind of similar because that comes from a kind of supernatural element to it. But in terms of what you guys have there, it's very unique. And the only thing that's comparable is Scandinavian, particularly Denmark.
I'm going to go with it being a guardian of the land, old pagan lands and old pagan rites, like some kind of a familiar of the local witches and the local practitioners of magic or keepers of the old ways.
Yeah.
And I think it gets stronger the more society rejects those old ways, and the more the science takes over and says that it's all nonsense.
I agree. I'm going to go with that with one proviso. It has been shown that, like, when dogs and cats go feral and back into the wild and start living off things like sheep and lambs and hares and stuff, that they grow unnaturally large and long fangs. They almost develop, the wild dogs now, a wolf-like element to them. So I think yes, I agree with that. Initially, we're dealing with a hellhound spiritual pagan archetype, but I think people have probably seen huge wild dogs that were living up in the moors, living off sheep and goats, and so that's where the kind of, like, we really saw it part came from.
And it's interesting with the cryptids, like you say, 9 times out of 10, we come to the conclusion that they're a spiritual thing and not a strange animal that's not got a name or been recognized. And I'm strangely comfortable with that. I prefer that to it being some kind of living zoological creature.
Well, from the time I began my paranormal 40 mission as a young teenager, I don't think I've ever really believed that they were extinct animals. I've always thought that was a lazy assumption, especially when you start investigating these stories closer, like the Loch Ness Monster, heavily connected to magical stuff, spiritual stuff, and then other animals too. And then again, mistaken identity things as well, like the elephants going for a swim in Loch Ness on their way to Inverness. Then people saw the trunk out of the water, and that's where the first sightings really occurred in mass. So again, like the real wild dogs. So yeah, I've often been much more. I think, like, if you look at the old Christian stories of an animal spirit being banished, like a giant dog or a sea monster or something, it's always spiritual nature. It's never, Saint Columba didn't go to the River Ness with a harpoon and kill the giant sea serpent. He issued a prayer. So that, for me, yeah, it's always been spiritual for me, more or less. And it makes me frustrated to see people, especially in the Bigfoot end of things, just cannot get their head past the thing that it's some kind of gorilla.
And I think cryptid is kind of a trendy word, isn't it?
Well, when you think about it, if you're skeptical of the paranormal, what is the most acceptable form of paranormal, well, an undiscovered animal, because all you have to say is, well, it could be like an animal we haven't discovered yet. So they can go there. They can look into our world with that proviso of, well, that makes sense. But they can't go beyond into the darkness or into the void or whatever you want to call it, of it being something even more fantastical.
And is cryptid just another word for a monster? Is a monster just something that we don't have a name for? Something
Yeah.
we don't recognize?
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound as scary to say it's a cryptid than to say it's a monster, but is a spiritual being a monster because we don't know what it is?
Yeah, cryptid is just a new word for monster. That's all that is, an acceptable word for, and there are cryptids in the sort of traditional sense. There are still giant animals under the ocean to be found and discovered. I have an encyclopedia here from 1900, and it lists the sea serpent the giant sea serpent as a real animal. So, and not as a myth. So there are the real things out there. But I think for me, that the answer is nearly always spiritual or some kind of entity.
Same, I agree. And maybe on some occasions, not all occasions, but some occasions, the sightings of these types of things could also be a manifestation of fear. Not saying that they don't exist. I'm saying it could represent the unknown or a fear in somebody's mind, and it actually appears as a physical thing, like a tulpa, when you will it into existence, and it comes through what your thoughts and feelings are.
Somebody said that last week in the comments of last week's show about the big grey man in Scotland, and brought on the thing that maybe the lack of oxygen at the high altitudes and so on might have caused this to happen as well. So I found that because when you think about it, there's an operational working in magic where it's you basically cut off your breathing, you bring yourself to the point of death, and then you start having the ultimate spiritual experience. This is the theory anyway, annihilation gnosis. So if nature was doing that for you, well, it's not surprising you would see gods and spirits.
Yeah, because they would already be there, but you wouldn't see them on this day-to-day frequency that we're in, would you? Until you was in between, until you was in the liminal spot, really, in between the two worlds, when you're on the edge of this one and about to go into another one. If you're on the edge of death, you're going to see all sorts of things, just like you do if you astral travel or you have an out-of-body experience. You see lots of things that are always there in the same space, but they become visible when you are out of your body.
And the nervous system becomes so heightened, it allows you to peer into other realities and affect space-time. How many people, when they're drowning, and I know 2 or 3 people have told me this, they said our entire life flashed by them. They lived in a second. And that's because their nervous system had become so excited and amplified by the experience of near death, that they were out of this space-time and experienced everything at once.
Yeah, that's interesting. When people go camping or they go and spend time in the outdoors, sleeping out there, they often report that they've had some kind of a paranormal experience in the forest or the woods. Perhaps that could be because they're so relaxed in the woods as they're about to go to sleep or meditate or whatever you're doing there, that you do actually come out of your body and you do become hypersensitive, but you don't realize. And so you don't realize that you're actually not of your body at that point. You're kind of just above it. So you see all kinds of things that you wouldn't normally see. And you think it's a paranormal experience because you think you're still in the physical.
In the Franco-Prussian War, there is a book which has never been translated into English. And I went to a lecture once, and the guy spoke about the paranormal experiences that French soldiers had in the forest at Fontainebleau during the Franco-Prussian War. They were small units and constantly in terror of the Prussians showing up and just killing them. And they're sleeping outside in the forest. And so many of them reported what we call spiritual experiences. And there you go. That would be what you were talking about. but amplified even more by the real spectre of death coming in the middle of the night.
And the same for the likes of everyday people who are not fighting in the war, like you or me or anybody watching this. If you go out camping, I know I've experienced it myself, and you're sitting outside the tent or whatever, and you're looking at the stars, and you kind of, your nervous system's heightened anyway because you're sleeping outside, so you're aware that you're not safe really. There's possibility of anything could come along. Depending where you are, you know, if you're in Scotland, it could be a wolf or anything. You don't know, so you kind of heighten then, and I think that fine tunes your nervous system anyway. So you tend to pick up on everything, every little rustle, every leaf, every sound, every noise. So you do tend to pick up on things that you wouldn't normally pick up on in your everyday waking life. So you're more susceptible to pick up these paranormal and spiritual entities and elementals that are there.
Well, that's why I stopped camping in my 30s. I didn't feel safe anymore. I know that sounds weird, but I used to camp a lot growing up, and then I didn't say I had experiences, I just felt increasingly not able to do it. And I haven't camped since I was in my 30s. And I did like some hardcore stuff. But yeah, I mean, I was almost like something was telling me you can't do this anymore. Something's going to happen on the next trip.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I know the feeling well. It's like if you want a wee in the middle of the night, it's a big deal because you think, I don't want to go, but I've got to go, and it's the worst thing ever. So you have to go outside of the tent or whatever it is you're sleeping in to go and do that, to come back, and you just feel like you're being watched or it's not safe.
Well, the last time I remember I was camping in upstate New York with my friend Lou, who's dead now, and there was a black bear outside the tent, and that was very frightening. And he had a handgun, and that was it for me. It was like, and the thing was rooting through our bags and ripping things up. And they're very dangerous, you know. If you see the claw marks they leave in trees, and they'll eat you, you know. And that was like it for me. I mean, that was you want to talk about, you know, running to the hotel the next day. It was like that, yeah. So I mean, you know, I know some people absolutely love camping and everything like that, but when you're in an area where there's not much help if something goes wrong, you get a hell of a wake up call to how false our civilization actually is, you know, and how pampered we are.
Yeah, I suppose in those circumstances, it's not just the spiritual things that you got to watch for. It's bears and lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, all those things
Snakes,
as well. Yeah,
and all night long the rattlesnakes around the tent. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's a lot to be said for a bed and breakfast.
I tried to. I spent last Saturday explaining this to a person who wanted to go camping down in Cork, and I said no. No, it's a hotel for me. That's the end of it.
Yeah,
I'm soft. I'm soft now.
no, I agree with you. So that's the paranormal black dogs of Northern England. And if you've ever come across one or you've heard of any stories, then please let us know in the comments. We'd be interested to hear your experiences or what you think they might be, or any stories that you've heard. Please put them in the comments.
And especially if there's black dog stories in your country.
Of course, yeah. If there's folklore and legend where you are, let us know. Maybe it's similar.
Are there portals to other dimensions, existences or planes? Well, if there are, one scary example might be Husker Castle, situated about 50 kilometers north of the Czech capital city of Prague, also known locally as the Gate to Hell. Over 1,000 years ago, much of the Czech countryside would have been dense forest. In the Husker area, these forests would have been dark, gloomy, damp and eerie, as the area is famous for its sandstone formations known as scarli. And in amongst these sandstone formations, in the middle of nowhere, lies this castle, Husker Castle, the Gate to Hell. You see, Husker is built on a fissure in the natural rocks, a bottomless pit which was said to lead to hell and from which hellish creatures were said to escape and harass travellers on nearby roads. The other thing about the castle is that it is built in the middle of nowhere. It seems to be protecting something inside rather than from something outside. It has no natural water supply and is miles from any main route. The story of Husker becomes even stranger, for as the structure was being built, the landlord agreed that whichever condemned man would be lowered on a rope into the crack in the rock to describe what he saw there would be freed. A volunteer was lowered only a few feet into the hole in the earth before he started screaming hysterically. He was immediately retrieved and found to have suddenly developed snow-white hair, aged at least 30 years, and had become quite mad. He died the following day without divulging what horrors he'd seen in the gate to hell. One can imagine that work resumed on the castle with even more urgency than before. The first mentioned structure on the site was a small wooden fort in the 9th century, though it is believed that the structure might have existed on the site since the 6th century. Part of Husker's mystery is that it is the exception to the rule in not having a documented history. In fact, it doesn't even appear on some maps, as if it were meant to be a secret that was best kept a secret. With its fake upper windows and floors that are not connected by stairs, the castle is a very strange structure indeed, and one wonders why it exists at all. Adding to the mystery is that during the Second World War, the Nazi SS occupied the castle. Why would a castle in the middle of nowhere and no strategic value be used by the SS? Many believed that the SS was running some kind of occult experiments there, perhaps with an energy portal, or that they were experimenting in creating the master race, a place where German SS troops would seed blonde-haired Aryan women in the hope of creating a superior race of humans. But no one knows for sure, and the retreating Nazis destroyed all the records of what actually took place there. The bottomless fissure apparently now lies beneath the floors of a small chapel. Painted on the walls of the inside of the chapel are some rather strange designs that include the only known example of a female left-handed centaur shooting a man with an arrow. On another wall is the image of St. Michael plunging his lance into the mouth of a fearsome dragon. Other images include St. Christopher, an angel weighing human souls, and the Christ. Having stood in the chapel myself, I can tell you that there is an energy there that after only a short while becomes absolutely unbearable. I had a headache for several hours after leaving. Interestingly, these murals add mystery to the castle, as being left-handed in medieval times was thought to be a sign of evil, the left-hand path, and St. Michael was the archangel tasked with fighting hell's hordes. Despite all of this, strange sounds, moans and screams are said to be heard coming from below the chapel, and people have claimed to see demonic entities there, including a strange creature that looks like a cross between a human, frog and a giant bulldog. The mural of the left-handed centaur stands starkly and reminds visitors of the gate to hell beneath their very feet. The castle's history also includes some other wicked and strange historical characters, as if it were a beacon of darkness with some significance known to practitioners of the dark arts. One of these was the Swedish rogue commander of a mercenary army that chose Husker as his headquarters. Aronto was thought to be a black magician and alchemist who performed certain experiments at the castle. He and his soldiers terrified the local population, who eventually summoned up enough courage to shoot him. I covered Husker in depth in my book about haunted places in the Czech Republic, but I've developed a theory as to what is going on there. It seems that the castle lies on the intersection of several earth energy lines, and somebody has blocked those energy lines off, disrupting the flow and creating a negative portal of energy. Dowsing there shows the placement of crosses and blocks of stone effectively has blocked the energy lines off. You can visit Husker Castle. It is open to the public. It has a very entertaining website, but be careful. It also has a very commercial aspect to it these days.
For this week's folk horror cinema, we are reviewing The Devil Rides Out, which is a classic horror film from 1968 based on the novel of the same name by Dennis Wheatley and directed by Terence Fisher. The movie stars Christopher Lee, Charles Gray, and Nikki Arrighi, and it's also one of the few Hammer films where Lee is portrayed as the hero and not the villain. And the film follows the Duke de Richelieu, played by Christopher Lee, and his friend Rex Van Ryn as they attempt to rescue their friend Simon from the clutches of a satanic cult. It's set in 1929 and it follows the story of Nicholas Duke de Richelieu, who is investigating the bizarre theory of his late friend's son, Simon Eire, played by Patrick Mower. And upon discovering that Simon is involved in the occult and has a house full of strange markings and a pentagram, de Richelieu and his friend Rex Van Ryn, played by Leon Green, set to rescue Simon and his fellow initiate, Tanith, played by Nikki Arrighi, from this satanic cult. And the rescue leads them to Salisbury Plain, where they interrupt a May Day ceremony, during which the devil arrives in the form of the goat of Mendes. Duke de Richelieu and Rex Van Ryn find themselves pursued by the leader of a satanic cult called Mokata, played by Charles Gray, who has a psychic connection to two of the cult's members. And when de Richelieu is absent, Mokata visits his house to discuss the matter and tries to convince these initiates to return to the cult, but fails. And this leads to a night of black magic attacks where Duke de Richelieu and the other occupants of the house must defend themselves against the black forces of evil. Christopher Lee is, as always, excellent in his role as the suave and sophisticated Duke de Richelieu, but he does have his work cut out for him, not least by the forces of darkness, but by his friends and family, who will not take him seriously and think everything he says is superstition. And there's one point in the film where he literally has to beg his niece's husband not to leave the circle of protection that he's made to get them through the night. Charles Gray is also very memorable as the leader of the cult, with his piercing, cold blue eyes and charismatic but menacing presence. And The Devil Rides Out is quite a heavy, unsettling film that doesn't rely on blood and gore to create a sense of horror. Instead, it explores the dangerous and often unsettling realm of black magic and the occult. And as Christopher Lee famously said, these forces are real, and the film serves as a sobering reminder that they should not be taken lightly or used for nefarious purposes. For those with an interest in occult philosophy and magic, The Devil Rides Out is a cautionary tale that reveals the very real dangers of delving too deeply into these dark and mysterious forces. The depiction of the Black Mass in particular is truly unsettling, thanks to the clever use of eerie lighting and chanting that only serve to enhance this film's already foreboding atmosphere. And as always, the signature Hammer trademark of using those saturated red colours against the black backdrops is also prominent and at the forefront, adding to the movie's overall haunting visuals. And it really is a truly memorable horror film that stood the test of time. And for that, I can almost forgive it for the muddy way it makes you feel after watching it.
The book was fantastic. The script's based on the book. The director, the stellar cast of British actors, all at the top of their game in both movies and TV at the time in it. It could not fail. It just is incredible. It's an amazing film. And Christopher Lee playing one of his few good guys. I think his that and Gandalf is probably all he's ever done as a good guy. I know he's done other films, but yeah, in that sense, I think he's fantastic. I mean, it's fantastic as Richelieu, who's the protagonist in most of Wheatley's novels dealing with those themes. The book is very complex, and it's very impressive that they got that movie script out of that book, because the book is very in depth in different directions. Now, there's a few factors I want to talk about here. as a piece of cinematic art, as a piece of Hammer gloriousness, we're all happy. Underlying that, and I'm going to explain why it's understandable, it's pretty much a nasty attack on paganism. They have the ritual to rebaptize Tanis and Simon on Walpurgis night in a stone circle. They talk, with the exception of Baphomet, all the other gods they mention, with the exception of Baphomet, all the other gods they invoke are pagans, Osiris and so on. And there's a reason for this. Like, if you're a pagan, you go, okay, I'm offended by this, okay? And you think to yourself, okay, Dennis Wheatley wrote his novels when the British witchcraft laws were still in effect. The first act of conjurations was issued by Elizabeth I. 400 years later, they were still in effect on the British statute books, and people were going to prison for witchcraft in the 1940s. So Wheatley had to put all this occultic stuff in there, just like Dion Fortune did with her books, and a book I'll be reviewing for the book section, to get around the English. They couldn't be seen glamorizing it, so they had to spin it as a morality play, where the angelic beings, you know, at the end of the film, the holy guardian angel of Michael comes through the mother of Peggy. They had to spin it with a Christian moral overtone to finish it off, because they could not be seen as showing. So paganism was called the dark arts or Satanism, a legacy we're still living with today. But a lot of that was because they had to get around the English witchcraft laws. Having said that, it's, as a pagan, it's still worth what they did to make a film this great. So I'm not like one of these snowflakes. Well, I'm offended with it. No, from a point of view of art, they delivered, and that's where it matters. But however, you could see pagans, and it's the same with The Wicker Man. I know, and that awful film from a few years ago, Midsummer. Still pagans are still attacked in cinema, in Hollywood films and stuff, and but The Devil Rides Out is just a fantastic film in every level. I mean, some of the cuts are unbelievable, and you know, the cast is just so perfect. Remember last week we did The Reptile. I thought the cast of the main couple arriving was poor, but this one, everyone was right just for the path. And there's things I remember. The scenes always stand out. As that fantastic car chase in those 1920s British roadsters, and Mokata, you know, wow, you know, he contacts Tanis through mind power, and then he makes a screen on the other guys on the cars go white. He pushes his fist through. I mean, it's just fantastic cinema without it even being horror. You just, some fantastic scenes in it. But yeah, that's how I feel about the film. It's fantastic. And people say to me, well, doesn't it take down pagans? And I say, you've got to understand that at the time that book was written.
That makes sense, because I did actually wonder, it didn't cross my mind about the witchcraft laws. I did wonder, why is it coming at it from a Christian angle? Why is Christianity the only way through this dark night that they're all going through? And at the end, they all thank God, you know, they had to thank God for what had happened. And I thought, that's very odd. Is that a metaphor for something else? Are they hiding something there? Have they got to do that to get it on the TV? Was it, you know, was that one of the boxes that had to be ticked? But now, having said that, it's, yeah, I forget, you see, when I'm watching them, that they're very old films. So it's back in a time when that law was still going strong and you had to be very, very careful.
Well, the book is from the time of the law, but not the film. But still, it would have, you know, remember what happened with The Life of Brian. It would have been condemned, and then distributors would have, you know, especially when it got to America, where they make their money, would have said, we're not showing this Devil Man film. You know, there was a lot of that kind of nonsense went on in those days. You know, you have Malcolm Muggeridge and people like that condemning it on the TV as being, you know, a satanic. Yes, it's the more Wheatley would be the first to tell you it was the only way I'd get the books out. And I've actually seen an interview or a talk that Dion Fortune gave, and she said my demon lover was in the same way. You know, it was. I'm not joking, Sarah, when I say that my early education into magic came from Dennis Wheatley books, because the rituals are real. They're Golden Dawn rituals. They're real rituals. And when I actually started reading books on ritual magic, well, I already knew about them from the Dennis Wheatley novels. So Dennis Wheatley is a man who did his homework, and we must be suspicious about it because he's a member of the British High Society. He's blown the whistle on what was going on inside these stately homes all over England.
It's funny you say that. One of the books I've got to review for today, there's actually an image in there that is a carbon copy of one of the scenes in that film, and that was just a pure chance that I picked that book up and I looked at it and I thought, well, what do you know? Look at that. That was in that film, and two totally different things. So yeah, they did take a lot of research, and they did do some real, I think they did some real rituals, and they maybe changed the words a little bit, you know, just so they didn't invoke anything. It was like that very first one we reviewed, the Hammer, from the Hammer series, and they mispronounced you know who I'm talking about, C333. They mispronounced his name on purpose. They kept saying it wrong, and I think they said it wrong on purpose because they didn't want to risk bringing it in, because they do look like proper rituals to me, what you're watching.
Well, the whole film is kind of like a ritual. That's another thing as well. It ends with the invocation of the Holy Guardian Angel, but instead of the actual having a ritual to evoke the Holy Guardian Angel, it happens by default in the mother, because she's already been kind of hypnotized by Richelieu. So she's performing like a medium in the same way Tanis was. And the film ends with something that was probably the first ever description of altering space-time. When Tanis comes back from the dead, and Christopher Lee gives this incredible speech to the camera. He goes, you have to understand the actual nature of space-time has been altered. All the things that happened, but now they haven't happened because we've gone back in time before they happened. Now, that was the first time people in movies ever heard about the kind of quantum universe kind of thing, which is central to ritual magic, the altering of space-time.
Yeah, that was a bit of a mind bender at the end. Yes. And when you watch those films, like I've seen that film many, many years ago. I was quite lucky. My parents let me watch this stuff when I was a kid. And you watch it and you think it's a horror film. Yes, it's not real. It's only a film. It's not real. But now, having an interest in the occult and knowing about these things, you think, actually, that's not far off what goes on that you don't see in the elite circles and the upper class mansions and middle class suburbs.
Sure, people were going on about how bizarre the coronation of King Charles was. It was a magic ritual.
That crossed my mind, yeah. I thought, I bet there was something similar going on the night before to the coronation.
And the same people that laugh at just say there's no such thing as magic rituals in there. They're watching the biggest one in the world. I mean, putting the screens around him and smearing his body in goose fat and all this kind of stuff.
I have to admit, when people say there's no such thing and you're being superstitious or you're living in the dark ages, I do find that a bit profane, and it does make me laugh. And I
know, and every Freemasonic lodge in the world does these rituals, and the same people say it doesn't. It's like everything else. The ordinary people are not allowed magic, just like money. The the upper echelons of society keep magic for themselves and tell the rest of us, it doesn't exist, just like they do with money and everything else.
I used to get quite annoyed when people would say that, and I might have argued the point with them, but now as I've gotten more into it and learned more about it and more about occult philosophy and things like that, I just don't say anything, and I just think you're just a fool. you're just a fool, and it's not, you know, you don't know nothing, and that's fine.
Another criticism leveled at Dennis Wheatley is a lot of the baddies are foreigners, but that was common even back then, even in Edith Blyton books, kids books, you know. But that was, and there was an article in Vice, which is usually shite anyway, but they had like a good thing that they were mentioning, like they were going about the whole thing that a lot of the baddies are foreigners and the demons are dark and black people sometimes and things like that. But then they never mention the pagan aspects, that it's offensive to people like us, you know, but we don't get bothered by it because we understand.
Yeah.
Wasn't Mr. Grey, the actor as MacArthur, absolutely phenomenal? I thought he should have got an Oscar for that.
Absolutely. And he was almost hypnotizing just looking into his eyes, and you think to yourself, wow, he's a very, very attractive.
Hannes, listen to me. Fantastic.
Yes. When he was coming through the rear view mirror in the car,
yeah.
you think, wow, look at them eyes, look at those eyes. And then you think to yourself, you know, if I come across somebody like him in real life, I think I might be glamorized myself.
Fascination, it's called.
Yeah.
That kind of matter is called fascination. Affecting the blood vessels in the eyes, yeah.
And affecting other people's will, you know, just by willing it and making them do things.
Yeah, he's much better than the gorgeous Brian Cox any day.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd rather go off with Mercato than I would watch Brian Cox, yeah.
Yeah, I also think it was a little bit of a homage to Crowley as well.
Yes. Yeah, did he mention him? I don't remember. Was he mentioned?
In the film, no, but in Dennis Wheatley's biography, The Devil is a Gentleman, he met Crowley a couple of times, and Crowley was saying, I'll do these things for you to give me money, which I always thought, I thought was fair enough, you know, you should get paid for being a consultant.
Yeah, I enjoyed the film. I really did. And even though it's got an extra level of eeriness, knowing that this stuff happens and what you was watching wasn't too far from a real ritual, I still enjoy it. It's kind of I don't know if it's a morbid curiosity or what, but I do enjoy things like that.
I think I don't know anyone who's seen the film who didn't love it. There you go. And just on a pure entertainment level, it's great. You know, it's got action, it's got girls, it's got fights, it's got horror, it's got it all, really, you know. Cool guys, you know.
Yes.
Fight. Yeah, cool cars, cool 1920s Bentleys and stuff.
It's not far off a 007 vibe, is it, really?
Yeah, actually, well, the scene, Richelaw was kind of an Ian Fleming kind of character. And remember, Wheatley's, all his other books are all spy novels.
The character with de Richelieu, you knew immediately, even if you'd never come across a Dennis Wheatley novel and never heard of de Richelieu, and you just watched that film because it was there, you knew the minute you saw him, from the pinky ring with the black stone in, to the perfectly manicured nails, to the mustache and the dark eyes, you just knew this is an occultist.
And also, you know, that Christopher Lee is an Italian, a Venetian aristocrat in real life. So he has the mannerisms, you know. And he says, you know, Simon bought himself a big house. Why the devil would he do that? Precisely. You know, it was like that kind of thing. It was that kind of like, upper end dinner party kind of conversation back in the old days.
Did you notice when they first went to Simon's house and the butler let them in, they were stood in the entrance hall and there was a curtain, like a doorway with a sash of curtains, and then one coming down like that. And the director positioned Christopher Lee right in the center of that doorway. So the way the curtains came down made Christopher Lee look like he had big horns.
Oh, I didn't notice that. A great visual trick. I love that. I loved Simon's ritual room / observatory in the attic of his house.
Yes.
I wouldn't mind having that myself. minus the two cockerels that were to be sacrificed.
Oh, but they got saved, thankfully, so that was a good thing. Because I was a bit worried about those. Yeah, excellent film, highly recommended, especially with the lights off.
And next week's film is The Day of the Triffids, a cosmic sci-fi horror film from the 1960s, British, and not the BBC TV movie from the 1980s. This is the 60s cinema release version of The Day of the Triffids. I love this film, and it's also the scenario that opens up the film is true horror. And so get watching that one, and we'll review that next week. Our second topic tonight is haunted Irish castles. Now, why do we associate Irish castles with being haunted more than any other country in the world? I find it very interesting that in many other countries you get haunted houses. In Ireland, it's more common to have haunted castles. And rather than my intro being specifically about any one or two places, I want to talk on the philosophical nature and probably paranormal Fortean nature, why this might be. Firstly, Ireland is covered in castles. We've had a long, turbulent history, and not only of like trying to drive out foreigners, but also amongst different kingdoms and clans in the country. And enormous, gigantic castles are built all over the place. There's even one practically in my backyard here in ruins. That's how common they are. Now, the connection with the nastiness of history is the reason I think many of these castles are haunted. I think a lot of the ghost stories that are reported in these castles are not traditional Borley rectory type ghosts you get in, say, England. A lot of them seem to be elemental or even demonic spirits. This could be a result of some of the awful things that went on in these castles. They were brutal places. They were not only places for the rich to live and to garrison their armies, but they were also places of torture. They were also places of murder and wickedness, things such as the murder holes and the oubliettes and all these other things, cruelty, that you went in the castle, you'd never come out. And are we dealing with ghosts here, or are we dealing with the tormented spirits that were generated by the wickedness that took place upon them? Because if you read the history of Ireland, particularly in the Middle Ages, it makes Game of Thrones look like the Osmonds or the Brady Bunch. I mean, those scenes, the worst scenes in that film were pretty normal in that TV series. They're pretty normal in Irish medieval history. You know, people inviting, another family over for a banquet and killing them all, like in Game of Thrones. That happened an awful lot. That was quite common, actually. And they wouldn't kill them quick either. And so on. And I think that all the wickedness and depravity of these, what would have been royalty, a lot of them, actually have generated, in some cases, some kind of entity, some kind of spiritual entity representing the wickedness. Now, later on, when these houses got taken over by, say, nice families or other people bought them, who didn't have this element about them, they had experienced these things too, except for one. And also the ghosts are often deformed, such as Puck, the deformed midget at Malahide Castle. There's a lot of that kind of thing, like a deformed elemental kind of thing as well. Now, there is one castle haunted house. It's not a castle, it's a stately home called Lishin, up the road here. And in the late Victorian era, this is the story now, one of the sons of the manor was a collector of Egyptology, and he brought mummies and other things from the pharaoh's tombs to the house in the road. And he was also big into the occult. And something happened, and the house basically began to eat itself, and it's considered one of the most haunted things. And that's not a ghost story. That's like messing with the dark arts, and it went really wrong. And I think a lot of the ghosts of Irish castles are actually the result of dark forces that happened or manifested. Yes, I know there's grey ladies and white ladies and so on, but I think a lot of it is that, and that's why, coupled with the fact that the sheer number of castles in Ireland, I think that is the primary reason why we call them haunted. You see, ghosts was a coverall word for any kind of entity that was seen in these houses, these stately homes. They're big castles, real castles, defensive castles. But in the old days, if you look into the old history, the word they used was phantoms. Now, a phantom is a kind of a catch-all phrase, not just necessarily a ghost as such. And very famous haunted castles, such as Leap Castle in Ireland here, had a horrific history with the oubliettes and the murder holes of enemies and things like that. And this castle is incredibly old. It's like 1,500 years old. It's absolutely, by castle standards, you're going back nearly to like Roman times. And I think that's why people are so fascinated by the haunted castles of Ireland, is because the stories are often phenomenal and romantic and gigantic and encapsulate grand periods of history. But the buildings themselves are probably the ultimate repository of psychometric energy. So what do you think of the haunted castles of Ireland, Sarah?
I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I would love to go and visit one. And one of the couple of them that I was researching, one of them, Castle, is it pronounced Leap?
Leap, yeah.
Leap, as it's spelt. Yeah, and it was quite a nefarious one, that, and lots of people were imprisoned and executed there, and that's possibly one of the reasons why the castle's haunted. And it's also got an elemental there called It, which is said to be a small creature the size of a sheep with a funny face, and it's got a smell of sulphur and the smell of death around it, like a corpse, according to what I've read. And the castle's ownership was transferred to a family called the Darbys, and Mildred Darby had been messing about with the occult because it was the fashion of the day. And the official line is that they believe it was Mildred's messing about in the occult that summoned or awoken this elemental being. And she even wrote about her ordeal back in 1909. And she said she was standing in a gallery there when she felt somebody put a hand on her shoulder. And when she looked, she said she saw a thing about the size of a sheep with a gaunt, inhuman face with black cavities for eyes and the smell of sulphur. And apparently that family remained in that castle until 1922. And am I right in assuming it's the Leap Castle that had the oubliette, which is the room of those that are forgotten?
Yeah, it's a French word, literally means the forgotten.
The forgotten, yeah. They push you down the hole, and there's a spike there. So if the spike, you're supposed to get impaled on the spike and you die, but if you miss or you only get caught by it, you don't die immediately. Apparently, you're stuck down there and you die a slow, painful death, and you can hear all the upper class of the upper crust in the next room partying and eating food, and while you're there stuck in this room to die a painful death. So I think, that would have a great big impact psychometrically on what's going on in that castle.
They used to, when they were drunk, they would urinate on the prisoners and laugh. And I remember the skulls and the bones of the fellas who were down there before you were at your feet. And if you missed the spikes off, and sometimes they would keep them deliberately alive. That it's an unbelievable form of cruelty. But what you said there about the spiritualism thing, yeah, in the late Victorian era, spiritualism, all the occultic stuff was all the rage with these families that lived in these Irish castles and stately homes. It was their hobby. It was, this is where the Golden Dawn and all that stuff came out of. And, Georgina Yates, William Butler Yeats' wife, she came from one of those kinds of families, and her biography is, she knew all about the occult and everything before he even set foot into the Golden Dawn.
Is it Castle Leap where the Red Lady's seen as well? I read about a red lady that's been seen by many people. I think it's Castle Leap. And the story goes that she's the ghost of a woman captured and raped by a family called the O'Carrolls. And she got pregnant as a result of that rape. And the O'Carrolls killed the baby. And in despair, she killed herself. And this red lady now has been seen carrying a dagger in her hand and raising it, going around with it in her hand, raising it menacingly as though she wants to stab somebody. And I think that's
some of these castles have it all, even strange lights in the sky above them, and lots of fairy thing. Lachine is built beside 2 fairy rings, and a lot of those castles were built on fairy forts because they were originally the site that the previous Celtic or Gaelic chieftains had their castle on. So they inherited as the whole thing, like in America, don't build on Indian burial ground. So that could be also a reason why Irish castles are so haunted, or it's better to say paranormal more than haunted, because they have everything.
Because of the sheep.
Yeah, everything.
Going back to that, is it Oubliette again? At Castle Leap. They found a pocket watch there in the dungeon from the 1840s, which begs the question, was the dungeon still in use then?
Possibly. I mean, they were used. A lot of those houses were destroyed in the War of Independence. The Eire burned a lot of them to the ground because the British Army were using them to quarter them as soldiers. So they were makeshift barracks. So the Eire bombed them and burned a lot of them down so they couldn't be used as barracks. So there's a lot of that went on as well. So, we probably even have more, haunted castles in Ireland if it wasn't for the War of Independence, which is something to think about.
Just to balance it out a little bit, I also just want to bring in Castle Leslie, which I think is in County Monaghan. Not all of the paranormal activity and all of the hauntings in these castles are all gruesome. They're not all gruesome or bad. And this one's quite a nice story, got a nice ending to it. In 1996, the then guardian of the castle began to experience some paranormal activity, and bells in the service hall would start ringing without any warning, and a shadowy figure was often seen walking up and down, and the kitchen was subjected to a lot of poltergeist activity. And the guests who stayed at this castle reported being visited by a man that they'd see in the bedroom with a wound on his forehead, and he'd appear to be rummaging around the bedroom searching for something before fading away. And it was later discovered that this man was actually Norman Leslie, who'd gone off to fight in France during World War I in October in 1914. Anyway, later on, he was seen by the lake on the castle grounds, and the family mistook him for being home from the war, and they were excited. They thought he'd come back to surprise them. And so they rustled up the servants, and they were instructed to go and get his room ready for his arrival. But he never came, he never knocked on the door. And a week later, a telegram arrived confirming that he'd been killed in action on the exact same day that he was seen at the castle by the lake. I was reading that one of the possibilities was that it could be that in the moments before death, there's a telepathic connection that can create an image of the person who's about to depart, and this image can then appear before loved ones or at a place where they were particularly drawn to. Anyway, in 1996, Norman Leslie's ghost had been trying to communicate with the current owners for a reason. He was trying to get a message to the lady of the house by going around looking for papers, and he had these ghostly papers in his hand. And at the time, the Leslie family was in the midst of a bitter dispute over the inheritance of the estate. And Samantha, she was called, the current owner who was in charge of the castle, had been looking for an important document that she'd hoped would resolve the litigation and bring it to an end. Anyway, despite searching high and low, she couldn't find it, and she'd all but given up hope. and resigned herself that they were going to lose the castle. But after seeing Norman walking around the castle holding up these papers in his hand, she was encouraged to go looking again, and this time she found the document she was looking for. And if Norman hadn't kept appearing, the document may never have been found, and the Leslie family's claim to the castle could have been in jeopardy. So thanks to Norman's ghost, the castle remained within the Leslie family's possession, which I thought was a nice story. So I just wanted to bring that little story in there just to give it some balance, that there are some nice stories that come from these magnificent haunted places in Ireland.
If you want a good introduction to the haunted castles of Ireland, in 1996, and it's available for free to watch on YouTube, there's an hour-long documentary, and it's fantastic, with the British actor Robert Hardy from All Creatures Great and Small. He played Siegfried. He's going around castles in Ireland looking at them, and he's fantastic. And they cover a lot of the ones we spoke about in the show. And it's called Castle Ghosts of Ireland 1996, and it's on YouTube with Robert Hardy if you want to watch it for free.
Do you think the castle? Well, it's the castles in Ireland, and many of them were on the sites of battles and murders and all kinds of betrayals. So I wonder if the ghosts that are haunting them, or the activity that's there, is the victims of those events, or the energy, the layers of energy of the trauma associated with events that have gone on there, that have been imprinted on the castle.
There's lots of soldiers and women were engaged to guys who went off the battle, was killed, and she threw herself off the castle walls. There's a lot of those kinds of stories. They were built on frontiers between sort of one area and another. And some of them are just incredible. Like there's one called Trim Castle, which is just colossal. It's like you cannot believe the size of it. It must have been like a skyscraper in the time it was built. But they were also symbols of power. It was a way for a local king or chieftain or lord to actually say, look what I have, that kind of thing.
Like the ultimate status symbol.
Yeah, interesting story is that Edward Kelly, John Dee's sidekick, he came from a family called Umain, the Umain family, and they were a very powerful sort of warrior castle building family in the west of Ireland, who claimed their roots back to Atlantis, interestingly enough.
Are you able to stay in them, a lot of them, or are they working castles? I know Castle Leslie is, but Castle Leith, a working castle.
A lot of ones they call castle, they're not real castles. They're stately homes that you stay in. There's loads of them. Like Ashford Castle, are resort hotels, hundreds of them actually. And as far as staying in a proper spooky castle, I don't know how many of them there are. I live here, so I wouldn't see it the same way a tourist does. I'd be looking for the ruined ones and things like that, but I'm sure there are. Yeah. So that was the haunted castles of Ireland. A very popular paranormal thing. In fact, people from all over the world come to Ireland just to do ghost hunting in Irish castles and that kind of thing. So I know this is going to be a popular topic tonight. So if you have any theories on this stuff, because in terms of my own 40 in life, this would be kind of down the list for me. I wouldn't be up, but I know it's a huge thing. I'd be much more interested in things like ancient sites and stuff like that. Old abbeys. I'm particularly interested in old abbeys. But there's one castle I just want to finish up with. It's called the Rock of Cashel. It's actually a citadel on top of a mountain in County Tipperary. And it was it's an abbey with a round tower, but it was once the headquarters of the Kings of Munster. And a few times I've visited there to go have a look at the round tower, I was struck by a very dark and foreboding feeling. So, and I didn't see nothing or experience nothing, but it was quite an unpleasant experience. So, I mean, that goes back to very ancient times, right back to pagan times, this place. So, I think one of the reasons these things are so popular is because they're very photogenic. They're in beautiful locations and they look amazing and stuff like that. But yeah, the haunted castles of Ireland, a very interesting topic that I'm now, after listening to Sarah speaking and doing this bit, I'm definitely going to go out there and look at it a bit more. And now we get to the part of Sarah's psychic hygiene report. Recently, I heard someone compare Sarah's accent to Daphne from that American sitcom Frasier, which is actually a put-on version of Sarah's accent. So here, without any further ado, is the Elsie Tanner of consciousness to delve into the Betty's hot pot of the psyche to deliver us with a recipe that will bring our spiritual state back into the rover's return. It's Sarah with the psychic weather.
Have you been feeling like you're walking through a thick fog of negative energy, unable to shake the feelings off of anxiety and unease? That's how I felt after last week's heavy psychic weather. But instead of succumbing to the negativity, I took some added steps to protect my psychic firewall from attack. And this week, I'd like to share them with you. Now, obsidian has long been revered by spiritual and healing practitioners for its powerful ability to protect against negative energy. And it's a natural volcanic glass. And obsidian is formed from the molten lava that cools quickly, giving it a unique energy that is both grounding and protective. After all, it was good enough for John Dee and his mirror. And it's known as the Truth and Protection Stone, as well as a revealing stone, which is said to empower you to be able to address that which is revealed or mirrored back to you. Now, if you're looking for a simple and creative way to incorporate obsidian into your psychic hygiene routine, consider creating an obsidian and salt bag. And this powerful little bag is really easy to make, and it can be carried with you wherever you go. Now, to make this bag, get a couple of small pieces of black obsidian, just tumblestones will do, and some kosher salt. And then find a small fabric bag or a pouch or even a sock and place pieces of the obsidian and the salt into the fabric bag and tie it shut. And you can carry the bag in your pocket or your purse, or you can wear it around your neck or your person. And the obsidian and kosher salt work together to create a powerful shield against negative energy, and the salt helps to neutralize any negative energy that may come your way, while the obsidian absorbs and deflects it. And together they create a powerful tool for protecting your energy and maintaining your psychic hygiene. Now, while crystals like obsidian and black tourmaline are known for their protective properties, it's important to remember that their power comes from the intention of the person using them. The crystal acts as a conduit for the energy, but it's the user who directs and amplifies that energy with their own thoughts and intentions. In other words, simply owning a crystal won't provide protection on its own. It's up to the user to set the intention for the crystal to act as a shield against negative energy or psychic attack. By focusing your thoughts and intention on the crystal's purpose, you can amplify its energy and create a stronger protective field around yourself. And that's my psychic hygiene suggestion for this week.
Great stuff. Shungite is another black stone that comes from Russia that has very similar properties as obsidian. The obsidian in John Dee's scrying glass is a real mystery. It's almost inconceivable how he has it. He had it. It was confirmed by university testing that it was actually from Aztecs. It was an Aztec scrying glass. Now, how it got to England and into his possession is a huge mystery, because it wasn't that long after Columbus discovered, they say that Columbus's voyage to America, and the Spanish completely controlled the Americas except for a bit around North America. And when John Cabot was sent by Henry VIII to go map North America, he only went around the Canada, Nova Scotia area. He actually was Italian. His real name was Giovanni Cabot, and so there's no, any sort of trade between Central and South America and England was impossible because of the war with Spain. So how on earth John Dee came into possession of an Aztec scrying glass literally not many years after Columbus had arrived in the Americas, and during a time when it was impossible for English ships to get to to Central and South America. How the hell did he got that thing? And so that's a real Fortean mystery in and of itself.
Maybe we should look into that for a future topic. Or is the answer not out there? Is it? Do we not? Does nobody know?
I think I'm the only one who's actually brought it up. He has obsidian too soon. Now you could understand it. Okay, I was theorizing on. I could say it might have came from Ireland because Ireland was not at war. Actually, Ireland was allied with Spain during those years, so there was no war. So it could have come via Kelly. That's one possible, and even that makes it an amazing story. That's the only possible route, because literally trade between England and Central and South America was absolutely impossible. So, and he had that thing early on, and he doesn't talk about where he got it or anything. It was called his devil mirror or something like that by someone else, or a phantom mirror. But yeah, it's his ownership of that. So even the actual stories behind certain obsidian things are magical. And I think Aztec's gods, they're seen holding obsidian, sticking out their leg, or whatever that means. They usually picked, personified as the usual Aztec god with all the wings, but they'll have an obsidian leg.
Right.
Interesting stuff, yeah.
Perhaps we can do a topic on that in a future episode then, about the mystery uses of obsidian with the ancients and John Dee scrying mirror.
Maybe, but also the Aztec stuff was I'm getting more and more interested in that, so we should look at the Aztec stuff is really getting. I'm starting to take an interest in that.
Now we come to our third and final topic for this evening. And during World War II, in October 1943, the US Navy conducted an experiment to make a warship invisible to enemy radar using an electromagnetic field. The ship was called the USS Eldridge, and the experiment at the time was known as the Rainbow Project, but would later become more widely known as the Philadelphia Experiment. The experiment is believed to have been based on an aspect of unified field theory, which is a term coined by Albert Einstein to describe a class of potential theories to describe mathematically and physically the interrelated nature of electromagnetism and gravity, and bringing both of these into a single field. The US Navy saw potential military value in this and sponsored the experiment. The experiment was said to be successful, but not without some unexpected and horrifying consequences. Firstly, researchers thought that by using Einstein's unified field theory, it would enable large electrical generators to bend light around the ship via refraction, so that the ship became completely invisible. Powerful magnetic fields were used to surround the ship before it disappeared from view. And then witnesses claimed that the Eldridge not only became invisible, but also disappeared from the area entirely. According to the story, the USS Eldridge allegedly reappeared just as suddenly as it disappeared, but this time 300 miles away at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Virginia, and it was reportedly seen materializing out of thin air before vanishing again for a second time and returning back to where it started. If that's true, this would suggest that the Philadelphia experiment was a success, as it not only made the ship invisible, but also transported it a considerable distance. Now, the aftermath of the Philadelphia experiment was far more ominous than expected. The crew of the USS Eldridge reportedly suffered a range of injuries when the rematerialization occurred in Philadelphia, including nausea, disorientation, insanity, burns, and mysterious illnesses. But the most alarming reports indicated that some crew members were found fused to parts of the ship, with some of them still being alive and others had vanished into thin air. Now, with regards to the crew, it gets even stranger than that. Later on, they were reported by witnesses to have been seen fading in and out of sight during a bar brawl. Sometime after returning to the land, the phenomenon was known as freezing, and many of the crew were also said to be put into asylums and their families told that they were missing in action or simply lost at sea. And it's believed the scientific team was disassembled and any witnesses were forced to sign draconian non-disclosure clauses. So Project Rainbow was classified as being beyond top secret with the US Navy, denying any involvement in any experiment and saying that no official records of the event exist. Now, as the story goes, numerous witnesses observed the Philadelphia experiment and saw the ship vanish and reappear. However, despite the number of these witnesses, only one person came forward publicly with information about it. And it wasn't until the 1950s that details about the experiment surfaced from a man named Carl Allen, also known as Carlos Miguel Allende. And he claimed to have witnessed the experiment firsthand, and he sent a series of letters to an author named Maurice Jessup, detailing his accounts of the events, including descriptions of a green fog around the ship and the crew's strange reactions. Now, Maurice K. Jessup was a scientist and an author, and perhaps most importantly, a Fortean thinker who believed that science should take a look at the exceptions and things that don't fit the theories. And he published a book in 1955 called The Case for the UFO. The US Navy Office were very interested in this book because they found a copy that contained handwritten footnotes claiming to be written by ETs that detailed alien technology and also mentioned the Philadelphia experiment. The Navy contacted the author Jessup and asked him if he knew anything about these footnotes, and Jessup recognized the handwriting as being the same as the letters he'd received from Carl Allen. But why were the Navy now so interested in this book? And that puzzled Jessup as well, and he started to look into the Philadelphia experiment for himself. By 1959, he apparently made a breakthrough, and he called up his friend, Dr. Valentine, to say that he'd found something really important regarding the experiment and that he wanted to meet up with him so he could show him and discuss it. And they arranged to meet for dinner the following evening. But the next day, Jessup's car was found parked up in Coral Gable, Florida, with the engine still running and a hose inside the car. He was barely alive inside and was suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning, and he later died. And ever since, there's been controversy surrounding what happened and what he must have known. The Navy kept all the books that had the handwriting in them. They kept them away from the public, and Jessup's death led to many investigators writing books and searching for the elusive Carl Allen. To this day, it's never been proven or disproven beyond all reasonable doubt as to whether the experiment actually happened. Yes, it's been debunked here and there, but those are only opinions. It's never been proven, and the death of Jessup opens up more questions than it brings answers.
There's a belief on Long Island, where I used to live, that the Montauk Laboratories and the Brookhaven National Laboratories at the very far end of Long Island were involved in the technology that was used on the Philadelphia experiment. The actual machinery, the coils that they used to generate this field, were actually made there. In the mid 1980s, late 1980s, I think there was a character that was well known in Long Island, as he was kind of like the local UFO hunter. And he used to talk about, it's quite, even though it's not far from New York, it's fairly remote out there in the rural parts of it. And he was going around the perimeter fences of Brookhaven National Laboratory. And he used to have newspapers like New York Newsday used to give him features. He was like the local harmless UFO nut, that kind of thing. Until he said he had information from the Montauk labs that they were involved in the Philadelphia thing. And he didn't come home one day, was never seen ever again. So there's another one for the body count. And that always sets off alarm bells. The whole concept of making battleships invisible has a long history. It goes right back to the dazzle ships of World War I, where they painted ships in mad colors and stripes to make it difficult for artillery gunners to actually, take aim. And it actually worked with great success. It was almost like a psychedelic painted ship. And the HMS Sheffield was the first one who actually messed with this technology with the Royal Navy. They set up a field around to try and affect radar, and radar and the protected from radar guided bombs and things like that. And that's when this first weird blue mist was first seen. And somehow that technology ended up in the U.S. Navy, which the U.S. Navy is a very funny organization. It's very heavily Masonic, and it's got a lot of kind of spookiness around it in terms of how the world is run and everything. Like they provide all the images for Google Satellite and stuff like that. But the U.S. Navy, the first time they tested on the Eldridge, the mist appeared and that disappeared, and all the sailors were very, very ill. Some had they all complained of migraines, vomiting, and others became unstable. They were just messed up by it. And what did they do? They did it again with even more powerful coils, which shows you if you join the military, you're an animal. You have no human rights. That's something people have to always remember, that they can do that whatever when you sign that line, they can do whatever the hell they want with you. But I do err on the side of belief when it comes to the Philadelphia experiment, because of the funny behavior around people who are associated to it, and also the technology is plausible. It seems to be a technology that they had that they couldn't control, and the fact that it appeared at a naval yard in Norfolk suggests to me that they had they had two setups. One, point A, point B. Point A, Philadelphia Navy Yard. Point B, Norfolk Navy Yard, and then back. So they were looking on a way to kind of leapfrog battleships on the field. So if it was about to be hit by a torpedo or a Russian bomber, it could jump to another place in time where this thing was set up. But of course, the horrific stories of what happened when the soldiers are completely harrowing when they got back of the naval personnel, and which I believe it now. And if you go into look for the history of the USS Eldridge, it's got a weird timeline. It was only built just before the experiment in the Philadelphia yard, and it's almost like the existence or the reality of the USS Eldridge has been affected in the space-time reality in its own real life. So that was one of the things as well. It has this weird timeline that makes no sense. So it's almost like the Philadelphia Naval Yard experiment actually altered space-time for that battleship, which I find really amazing if that's true. So there's a few things there. That story from the guy in Long Island, the weird things, and also it makes perfect sense that they would have a point A, a point B, and point back, because apparently these transportation technologies had been tested in Brookhaven and Montauk and Long Island, and that's why they were intrinsically linked with the Philadelphia thing.
Do you know what it brought to mind for me? The Star Trek thing. In Star Trek, the teleporter, because that thing was always going wrong. When they were energizing them down and bringing them back, it was always breaking down in the episodes, and there'd be problems. People's molecules weren't being put back together again in some episodes. It was kind of.
It was in one of the movies. I think it was the first one, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Something went wrong.
Yes.
Did they successfully come back? And you just hear Kirk hearing on the radio, well, something came back, meaning they came back in bits, all their molecules all rearranged.
And that's what came to mind when I read about the molecules being rearranged, and then these sailors were fused with the machinery. They'd been reassembled, and they were fused with the machinery of the ship while they were still alive.
There's a film about the Philadelphia experiment, and it shows like scenes of Phyllis halfway between, his legs are on one side of the bulkhead, but his body's on the other. This kind of thing.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it would feel like to be exposed to those high levels of electromagnetism. I don't know what effect that would have on the body, but it's horrific.
Oh yeah, it destroys your mind. It literally destroys your mind. So to be near these enormous amounts of high frequency without shielding, it's deadly. And and even if they had survived the teleporting, the chances are they would have destroyed their immune system and been very vulnerable to cancer, and maybe even had genetic damage. You know, it's just to show they don't care about people's lives when they're in the military. You're just disposable. You're a lab rat. But yeah, it took 10 years really before the whole thing. It was 43, 1955, I think, before actually someone started talking about it. And that sounds just about right for the sort of people that get bravery. And there were witnesses. They did see there was one ship called the SS Andrew Fuseret, where apparently all the personnel on board saw the Eldridge vanish in the Navy Yard.
Is the HARP technology high levels of electromagnetic energy?
Well, you know, the HARP is one of those. Yes, it does exist, and but what does it do? We don't really know. We know that it has, you know, it uses the ionosphere to energize them. And the official story is that was based as a submarine communications technology during the Cold War, which actually would work, you know, to send signals around the planet, this kind of thing, more efficiently than shortwave radio. But shortwave works by the radio wave bouncing off the atmosphere then into the earth and like that, like a daisy chain. But with the idea of the HARP was the ionosphere would run across it. Yeah, I mean, we know HARP exists. We know it's real, and it's. I often think about HARP as being I remember Mother Jones magazine, which is now a Brian Cox magazine. I put it that way. You know, there's no such thing as conspiracy theories. They were the ones who broke the thing on HARP back in the '90s, early '90s, at a time when, you know, it was officially denounced. And they were saying, what is this machine doing? And now they're the complete opposite. They're like everything else in the world today. It's inverted. But yeah, HARP is not. But this thing was actually the physical matter of the ship. You know what I mean? The ship became a machine for teleporting rather than a wave in the sky or something. So that makes it. And the fact that they used live humans on it is, to me, it's just appalling, you know.
See it in so much popular culture as well. There was an episode of X-Files, I think, about that Philadelphia experiment. And also, do you remember the American series Lost?
I'd never seen it, but I do know it.
There was things like that going on there on this strange island where things were appearing and disappearing, and polar bears were turning up and all kinds of things.
I just remember something. The unified field theory as applied to the Philadelphia experiment, that this guy in Long Island who was vanished, and it makes sense that their thing was not to teleport ships per se, but to bend light and change reality around the ship. So artillery gunners wanted to sight it and fire their artillery guns at it, that they literally couldn't properly see it because the light around the ship was distorted by these high ampage, high frequency electronic coils. That's what the guy said. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. So it was almost like a dazzle ship, but using electronics to mess with light and to mess with perception. And what they got instead was teleportation.
Hey, it's frightening, isn't it? Because that would be wouldn't that be tantamount to time travel?
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying. The timeline of the Eldridge, when you look on the Wikipedia page, is a bit weird. So it's like that thing like the Eldridge itself became like a TARDIS and somehow lost its fixed position in time. I would love to know stories of sailors who served on that ship afterwards, if they had any weird experiences. I would say they did, you know, because it's this big hunk of metal that had this thing affected on it. You know, they were kind of dicing, you know, it's like when they exploded the first atomic bomb at the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos. They didn't know they would end the universe, because they thought that there was a possibility that a chain reaction of atomic explosions would literally destroy reality. It would never end, and not only would the world blow up, but the universe would blow up. And they still detonate the bomb. And there's a few things like that in history where, you know, the machines that could have, like, or viruses or all kinds of things that could have wrecked reality or life, and they didn't hold back on them. They just pressed the button.
How do we know that it didn't wreck reality, and that's why we are where we are now? Because we often say that we feel like we're on the wrong timeline. Maybe we're just bouncing about from timeline to timeline as a result of that.
You hear a lot of stories about CERN and the Hadron Collider. I don't know about that, but uh, uh, we only hear about what they want us to know about. We only hear like their civil projects, but on the defense projects, we don't know what the U.S. Navy is really up to. We don't know what you know, there's all these military bases that exist under England that nobody knows what goes on down there, and they've been of grave concern to people since the early 1970s of why they built these things. So we've heard, only reason we heard about the Philadelphia thing was because someone saw it and blew the whistle.
You don't know what they're tinkering with, do you? And it takes you back to Antarctica. That it's a perfect place to go carrying out these experiments or doing the projects up there, because there's nothing there. You can't get there to see.
I mean, I'm not going to get too conspiratorial, but 9/11 to me, the further I get away from it, looks like it was a big weird scientific experiment. Yeah, so I mean, the whole thing of the Building 7 thing has been saying that's proof of they hadn't pulled it, whatever. I don't know. There was some very weird experiences on that day, and I often wonder if that was actually proof of a time slip right there, that the building existed in a different reality that we saw them. It was on the TV. They've never explained it properly. But yeah, I often wonder, the opening scene of the movie Saving Private Ryan, where he basically goes into an altered reality on the beach because of all the mayhem and the sensory overload of the horror that's going on around them. Well, that's been reported by many soldiers where they said they felt like they were in a different space time. Their nervous system and the next thing they know, the battle was over and they couldn't remember anything.
So like a disassociation, but not a mental one.
No, and like they should have been dead, but they survived. Like bullets didn't affect them. Like they had jumped out of this reality to miss the bullets. I'm just saying, it's a weird thing, and the Philadelphia experiment. I often wonder if they were trying to. The military people had heard these stories and says, "Can we actually make this happen without trauma by making a machine that would do it?" And that was probably that could have been one of the reasons they put this experiment together.
And we don't know if it was a success and they've hidden it and they're using the technology now, or whether it was so dangerous they've shelved it. We don't know.
It could be either one, or it could be both. Yep.
Who knows? So that's the Philadelphia experiment. So we really like to hear your thoughts and views on the subject. What you think? Have you got any theories? Have you got any inside information? Absolutely anything, really. We'd be interested to know. It's time for the man who can interpret the skies as if they were an open book. With his unsurpassed intuition and heightened sixth sense, he detects even the slightest shifts in the winds and the subtle vibrations of the elements. So sit tight, kick back, and allow our psychic weather whisperer to navigate you through the twists and turns of the upcoming week.
Well, a bit of a departure from the psychic weather usual format this week. Two reasons. One, we seem to be now in the lull. That dark period, that intense, nasty period is definitely gone, or almost gone for most of us. And there just seems to be just like you could have regular weather that's like, what's the weather like today? It's like, meh, nothing really. What's the psychic weather like? It can be the same, and that's what we're going through at the moment. So rather than just say it's nothing's distinctive, something else has happened, and we're kind of going back a little bit to the old VON days with this one. I had a remarkable dream last night, and of course you don't judge everything on one dream, but I think it was an intense and significant enough dream that I want to see if you are having mad dreams at the moment. You can tell me in the comments. Now, the dream that I had was there was terrible weather problems. The sky was black with wild moving clouds outside to the north here. And there was lightning and rain, and it was like the kind of, you see these illustrations of what the weather is like on Jupiter. It's much far more intense than what it is on Earth. But the sun was still visible in the sky. But you know the way you have a cloudy day and the sun is visible through hazy clouds. It was like that. And then a voice said beside me that the sun is going to be eclipsed, not by the moon, but by Venus. Now, that's impossible because Venus would have to be next to the Earth, in between the Earth's orbit. You do have a thing where it would go past it, but it would just be a dot, right? But it was going. I looked up at the sky and it blacked it out in the same way the moon does. So it went over and blacked the Earth out in the sky, and the weather and the storms became even more ferocious, as if there was something wrong with the planet, as if the planet was damaged in some way. Now, and it was almost like I was experiencing Velikovsky's theories in real time. A Venus flew past the Earth. And we needed food, but I couldn't get the food because the fridge was outside empty, lying down on the ground, and with just the door open and no food in it. And I don't, that was the dream, but it was the intensity of the dream. It doesn't make any sense that Venus would, that the sun would be occulted by Venus, and the intensity of the storms, and then the lack of food and stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying it's prophetic, the dream, or anything like that, but it was unbelievably symbolic. So I would like to know in the comment section if you've had dreams. Look, we all have mad dreams, but sometimes you'll have a mad dream that will leave an especially deep feeling in you, and that was one of these ones. So that's a psychic weather this week. Let's pay attention to the dream oracles during this period of low intensity psychic weather. Thank you.
I wonder if that dream was metaphorically or signified the dark night of the soul before we get the morning star rising in the morning, and that's why it eclipsed the sun, because when the illumination comes, it's going to be brighter than the sun.
It could be. I mean, I didn't get any positive feelings about it. I didn't get any particularly terrifying feelings about it. It was almost like my mentality was like, "Oh, what's this crap?" That kind of a thing. But the weather was what really got me. It was the Earth's sky was broken. That's the impression I got. And there was intense lightning that was, and actually in one part of the dream, I wanted to go outside to check the fridge to see if there was food in it. And the voice says to me, "Don't go out there. You'll get hit by lightning. It's everywhere. It's flying in all directions."
Watch this space and see.
Well, you have pagan gods in it. You have Thor, you have Indra, and you have Lucifer. Lucifer occulting the sun. As a solid planet, and I don't know. I'll leave that up to you and everyone else to see how do you write that one out.
I shall keep a dream journal. I always try to do that, but I have to admit I've not had any dreams that have been significant enough to write down really for the last few weeks. Be mindful of those now coming in.
Well, that's me now. I didn't really have one for the ages, but I did last night.
Every week, some people like to crack open a bottle of wine. Well, every week, me and Thomas like to crack open the spines of some of the most fascinating books that we've got on our shelves that we've collected over the years. And again, as we've said before, it's just a chance for a bit of indulgence and some show and tell to share the books that have inspired us both and ignited our imaginations, in the hope to provide you with some fresh ideas and inspirations for your next read. So let's have a dive into the world of our Fortean bookshelves. And this week, my book is the Wordsworth Dictionary of the Occult. And it's written by Andre Nataf. And it's a detailed guide into the esoteric world of occultism. And the book covers a wide range of topics, including the usuals: astrology, tarot, divination, magic, and mysticism. And it's also an excellent resource for anyone interested in the history and practice of the occult. And it also covers things like occult geometry, Freemasonic lodges from an occult perspective rather than a conspiratorial one, all the masters of occultism, right from Roger Bacon to Aleister Crowley, plus examples of occult thought in literature, from Balzac to Blake to Dennis Wheatley. They're all in the book. And it provides a wealth of information from the origins of the occult to various practices and traditions that have been developed over time. And it's organised alphabetically, which makes it really easy to find the information on specific topics and people. And each entry is really well written and informative, and it provides a great explanation of the subject at hand and talks about the various movements and the movers and shakers and thinkers that have shaped the occult throughout history. It's an excellent resource for anyone interested in the esoteric world. And as an interesting aside, I mentioned before, on page 75, there is a drawing of a Dr. Faustus, and it looks the exact same scene as the protective circle from our friend, the Duke de Richelieu, from the film earlier. And I'm just going to show you that there. When he had the magic circle and they were all stood in it with the heads back to back, the circle there and the demon outside, which just reminded me of the scene from that movie when the spider arrived and he said, "Don't leave the circle." And it mimicked one of the children, didn't it? And she thought it was a child that had come in. And he said, "That's not your child, that's..." Because it was trying to get him to leave.
A doppelganger of Peggy.
Yes. So a great book, actually, really good. Very, very informative. Highly recommended. Another one to just dip in and out on the coffee table.
But what's good about that one is that usually books in that kind of format are usually encyclopedic and they're in A4 format and they're a bit big. That one's A5, so you can bring it on the bus or train going to work and have a read. Yeah. You don't have, so you can carry it around, which is handy. So it's one of those. It's one of the few books in that world, in that genre, we're going to call it, that's in A4 format. So it's real handy for that reason.
Yeah, great book. I think it was published 1988, so it's one of the not one of the greats from the 70s, but it's not fluffy. It's a good one.
Yeah, it's in that spirit.
Yes.
Okay, my book this week is I think it's my first fiction book, and it's Moonchild by Aleister Crowley. Now, Moonchild is a novel he wrote in 1917 that's surprisingly entertaining and actually a real romp, a ripping yarn. That's a very enjoyable book and kind of gives you an insight into the great beast's personality, in terms of that he was probably a fantastic storyteller when you were in his company. Moonchild tells the story of a young woman called Lisa who's been kidnapped by a dark occult group in London, who are taking her to Sicily via Paris in order to put a moonchild inside her. And this moonchild is designed to improve or make the human race a kind of a super race. The main hero in the book is a character called Simon If, who's basically the white occultist guy. Now, like Dennis Wheatley's books, what you do is you get a huge education through fiction. This was probably the very first thing, considering how old this book is, It talks about quantum theory, yoga, lots of things. The cutting edge science at even the time this was produced. It explains all supernatural things that the average person wouldn't know, and it hides it inside fiction. So if you like Lovecraft and you like Wheatley, you'll love Moonchild. It's really, really good. Now, this book is also interesting in the point, it's very readable, extremely readable, in the point that it became probably the basis for the first chaos magic working, when L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons used the basic premise behind it for the Babylon working, when they both went into the Mojave Desert to bring forth the Moonchild. So, but it was more sort of like fleshed out with things like the sacred whore and stuff. But again, it worked because when they came back from the desert, Marjorie Cameron, ironically, the first woman, I believe, in the USA to have made a UFO report to the police, was sitting in the Agape Lodge in Pasadena waiting for him. So he summoned his Moonchild. He summoned his Babylon. But yes, the book Moonchild. I've seen some stupid truther stuff over the years saying this book is cursed and you shouldn't read it and everything. It's just a fun, supernatural, detective-y, adventure-y story, but very, very enjoyable, very, very readable, and full of stuff that I learned from it. I discovered through Moonchild that Charing Cross was the magical gateway to the city of London. And like places like where they have their apartments or beside the execution grounds, where in Paris, where Marie Antoinette had her head cut off and things like this. It's full of all kinds of stuff. Now, it's also full of barely hidden characters. This is classic Crowley. People he didn't like, he put them in as baddies in the book. And even Lisa, the girl who's the thing, she kind of reminds me of Layla Waddle. She's an Irish, like a wild Irish beauty kind of thing, exotic gypsy type. And he has to go McGregor's Mathers and a few others inside this. And but having said that, an extremely enjoyable book. And there you go. If you like Dennis Wheatley, you'll enjoy this. Moonchild by Alistair Crowley.
Who gave him that nickname, the Great Beast? Where did that come from?
Himself.
He gave it himself. Oh, that's all right.
Yeah,
then.
yeah. Well, I mean, he called himself, like, Baphomet. He called himself the Great Beast, the Antichrist. Well, his mother used to call him the Antichrist when he was a teenager because she caught him having sex with the maid. And they were Plymouth Brethrens, which is a really strict Presbyterian religion. He gave himself all those names. The Great Beast. He caught the most wickedest man in the world. He loved all that stuff. He was the original showman. I mean, he invented the 20th century. All our notions of the rock star and rock and roll. I mean, the Rites of Elysium, which was held in Caxton Hall in London, that was the very first ever rock concert, really, when you think about it. And it was based on the Rites of Elysium from ancient Greece, a pagan ritual. So, that he was a man ahead of his time. It's hard to imagine the 20th century, from things like Wheatley to the lyrics of China Girl by Bowie, that are, it was the Iggy Pop song, that don't include Crowley. He's everywhere. I mean, I've made documentaries. I mean, I made one on Sintra in Portugal, and I was talking Pissarro, the Italian novelist, and it goes, and Alistair Crowley, and I interjected, yes, him again. It's like, because he literally shows up everywhere.
I mean, yes, he was a magician and he was a serious occultist, but he was also very theatrical.
Oh, he must sound like.
I think he liked to shock.
He was the ultimate expression of that Oscar Wilde thing. What's worse than being talked about, not being talked about? And I mean, he was genuinely devastated in that court case that he lost, but a lot of it was his own fault. He made sure to sex his image up as much as possible, and by that time he kind of hadn't lost his charisma. He was sort of like, his wild man image in the media had been kind of forgotten. but it was only going into kind of hibernation, because when he talked about birthing the Aeon of Horus, well, he did it. He did it. I mean, all these the image of the rock star and rock and roll and hedonistic lifestyles now and all that stuff. I mean, it all came true. He kind of invented the modern world. I think Jimmy Page once said that he kind of invented everything that we have today. I often wonder if bands like Black Sabbath would have existed if, the Rolling Stones, if that world had come into being without him. And I think Moonchild was almost like a magical text in itself, like that, because you have to look at the date in this thing to read it, and then you go, it's really that old, because it reads like a modern book.
He's one of those people, isn't he, that you can't mention him freely. You can't mention you've got an interest in him freely on your social media without getting attacked.
God forbid, like me, you admit you cite him as someone you actually admire, and you're glad he existed, and his works have been. You see, people see it's amazing. The reaction is right. Like, people on the true crowd, truthers, they always cite magic in theory and practice, where he talks about the nature of sacrifice, and that the most powerful form of sacrifice was a 8-year-old boy. Now, he's discussing this from an anthropological point of view, in exactly the same way that Fraser did in The Golden Bough with the Red Robin, slashing a guy's throat and fertilizing the field with his blood. Or the oak men of Dunnar, someone damaged an oak tree, stole the bark from an oak tree in Germany, that they would disembowel him and wrap his guts around the tree to give his life force back to the tree to say sorry. That doesn't mean Fraser did that. He's explaining what happened, and that's what Crowley's doing in Magic and Theory and Practice. But they all go, "Oh no, he's a satanic paedophile who ate little boys and stuff like that." Nothing of the sort, and there's plenty of respectable people out there have less morality than he did. They think that the temple of Thelema in Kephalou in Sicily, and there was families living there, and there was huge amounts of drugs going on, but the kids weren't being touched. See, what happened was the case revolved out of a guy's husband, a woman's husband, who died there just from too much drugs and everything. And then she was like, she was so upset she made up stories that he died from drinking cat's blood. None of this stuff is true. None of it, And Crowley made the mistake of kind of sexing it all up. But at the same time too, it backfired on him a little bit. But now his legacy has been kind of resolved. I mean, when you think of some of the things he said, is the blasphemy stuff that he came out with and stuff. He wanted to create Crowleyanity to replace Christianity and stuff. That was shocking to people back then. But the newspapers like the Daily Express loved it. They loved him for it, because he gave them copy pages of stuff they could write up. So, I mean, that's when you read Moonchild, you realize that the guy was really far ahead of his time. And it's a shame he didn't write more fictional novels like this. I could understand why he was a bit resentful of Dennis Wheatley, because Dennis Wheatley made millions and millions in money from his books, and Crowley didn't really make an awful lot from his. And that's not true that he died impoverished. He just wasn't rich. But that's So if you want kind of a new understanding of Crowley, read this and kind of put yourself in that he's a mixture of Cyril Gray and Simon If inside the book. So it's worth it just for that.
Yeah, I'm gonna give that a go. And I don't believe he gets blamed for everything at the moment, that guy, which I just think it's laughable. He gets mentioned for everything.
But it's also immortality. In the same way that he's created every man and woman is a star, his star is burning brightly just by the fact that he's blasted his charisma into the next century.
Yeah, he'll never be forgotten. And he'll drive truthers and Christians mad till the end of time.
Yeah, and he knew it too.
Yeah.
And, you know, when he was like an old man, young women were throwing themselves at him. So he must have had incredible appeal to people.
He had the charisma, didn't he?
Beautiful young women were like wanted to be with him.
Yeah.
And this kind of thing. But he was an adventurer too. He'd explored the world on his own, and went into the remote regions of the earth when he was a young man. So he had the stories. He had. I often think that one of the reasons why Jack Parsons was so seduced by L. Ron Hubbard was that, first of all, Parsons was desperate for a father figure, and he was writing. He loved Crowley, and the letters they wrote back and forth between America and England, and he called him as my long lost father. He genuinely loved him, and that Parsons Hubbard kind of arrived in the Gap Bay Lodge, talked about all the adventures he'd had when he was in the Navy. And here he had like, oh wow, I've got like a surrogate father here. That is, he longed for these stories. But what's interesting is that Crowley got angry at both of them because they said they'd heard through Man McMurphy that both of them were going to work to Babylon working, and he said, like, I will not be responsible for what happens if those two create a moon child.
I can't think of a better person actually to have on your side if you're a person who's in need of a father figure than somebody like that. I mean, imagine having him in your corner now with regards to the needlecraft, him giving you his philosophy. Imagine him the vlogs like what you're doing with regards to what's going on now.
Yeah, I often think about things like that, and a sense of humor, that satirical cutting, like when he was in Tibet and there was a mountain climbing expedition that ended in catastrophe, and a lot of the climbers were killed, and they tried to make it was his fault, but it wasn't. It was the weather. And when he got back down, how he got back was that he had two Sherpas who were going to murder him and steal his stuff, so he pulled a revolver on them and forced them at gunpoint to lead him down the mountain. And when he got back down, he met a guy from the Daily Express, and he goes, "What happened to the two Sherpas?" He goes, "Well, I cooked them and ate them, of course." So there'd never be enough time in the world to talk about that guy and his influence. There wouldn't be,
Well, it's time to wrap up this week's episode and say goodnight. We hope you've enjoyed tonight's journey into the unexplained, and you'll join us again next week. And thank you again for letting us be part of your Sunday night. And the next week, we will be back over on Beyond Room 313. So please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. I'm sure you already have. And if you have, then make sure you've hit the notification bell and continue to share the show far and wide. You guys are our only form of advertising, and we do appreciate every share and every view that you invest in us. So please keep watching, and we'll keep bringing you more and more episodes, and we can't say fairer than that.
Yeah, thanks again for the fantastic comments, especially. And the show started off as we really didn't know where we were going to take it, but through kind of osmosis and magic, it's kind of evolved into just what we have now, and I think I really like the format. I think it's different, and as long as you want us, we'll keep Sunday safe for high strangeness. And now, of course, we finish up with the tarot card of the week. And what is it this week, Sarah?
Oh, it's fabulous this week. It's a beautiful card. It is the Knight of Cups, the most romantic card in the deck. The Knight of Cups is a card that oozes the essence of chivalry and romance and creativity. And he actually reminds me of Beethoven writing a sonnet to his unrequited love. And it depicts a noble knight riding a white horse holding a golden cup. And the knight wears a tunic with fish, symbolizing his emotional depth and intuition, and a flowing cloak representing his creative spirit. His helmet and boots are winged, and that is a symbol of active and creative imagination and an appreciation for beautiful things. The Knight of Cups is a dreamer a romantic and a visionary, and he's deeply in tune with his emotions, and he's not afraid to express them openly. He represents the pursuit of artistic endeavours, the pursuit of love, and the exploration of the inner self. When this card appears in a reading, it signals the arrival of a creative opportunity or a new romantic relationship. You may have had a dream about an artistic endeavour, and this card is encouraging you to take the action that's needed to put that creative dream in motion. It also encourages you to follow your passions and listen to your intuition. The Knight of Cups encourages you to dive headfirst into your creative pursuits and let your passions take off. Whether it's painting, writing, or dancing, allow yourself to fully immerse in your chosen art form and let it take you on a wild ride. As you embark on this creative journey, remember that patience is key. The Knight of Cups doesn't rush towards the finish line, but instead he savours every moment of the creative process. Embrace the journey and don't worry about the destination. It's not about producing a masterpiece in record time, but rather about allowing your creativity to flow freely. However, don't let your dreams remain only in your head. Take action and bring them to life. The Knight of Cups reminds you that imagination thrives on action, and without it, your dreams will just remain that, distant fantasies. So pick up that paintbrush, put on your dancing shoes, or grab a pen and paper and start creating. Let your creativity lead the way, and who knows where it might take you. In effect, the Knight of Cups is a reminder to honour your creativity, embrace your emotional depth, and remain open to the magic and wonder of life.
You mentioned Beethoven at the start. I always assume, or not assume, but I always think of the songwriters and poets as this being their card, the songwriter and the poet. And he's also on a quest. Remember, he's moving. So he's looking for inspiration, and he's looking for his muse to provide him with it. And that thing of the songwriter and the poet that he represents goes right back to the bards and the troubadours. So it's part of that whole thing of the traveling bardic troubadour, modern songwriter kind of thing. Yeah, it's a great card for particularly for people, artistic people, and especially songwriters.
See you next time.
Good night, everybody.